Hey guys, today we're diving into the fascinating world of contract law with a focus on the Doctrine of Estoppel. We will explore the landmark English case, Central London Property Trust and High Trees, which was pivotal in establishing this doctrine. This case is not only a cornerstone of English contract law, but also influences Singapore law. By the end of the video, you'll have a clear understanding of estoppel, relevant Singapore laws, and practical examples. Let's begin by setting the scene with the facts of the High Trees case. In 1937, Central London Property Trust, who is the landlord, leased a block of flats to High Trees House Ltd, the tenant, for £2,500 a year. However, during World War II, occupancy rates in London dropped drastically, making it hard for tenants like High Trees to keep up with the rent. To accommodate, Central London Property Trust verbally agreed to halve the rent to £1,250 per year, acknowledging the hardship caused by the war. Importantly, this agreement was temporary until the war's end. By 1945, the war was over and the flats were fully occupied again. Central London Property Trust sought to restore the rent to the original $2,500. They claimed that the reduced rent was only meant for the war period. High Trees House argued that since there was no formal end to the agreement, they were entitled to the reduced rent indefinitely. The key legal issue in High Trees was whether Central London Property Trust could return to the original rent without formal notice, or if the reduced rent should remain effective. Lord Denning, who presided over the case, introduced the doctrine of promissory estoppel. He held that while there was no formal contract modification, the landlord was estopped from claiming the full rent for the war period because they had agreed to the reduction and the tenant had relied on it. However, Lord Denning clarified that promissory estoppel only applied to prevent Central London from reclaiming past rent owed during the war. Once the war was over, the full rent could be reinstated as the conditions justifying the reduction no longer existed. This decision was groundbreaking. It recognized that even in the absence of formal consideration, an agreement could bind parties if one relies on the other's promise to their detriment. This principle has since become fundamental in common law. In Singapore, the doctrine of estoppel is applied primarily under common law. Key sections of the Evidence Act and common law principles guide the application of estoppel in contracts and other agreements. Singapore recognizes various forms of estoppel. The first type is promissory estoppel. If one party makes a clear promise not to enforce their rights under a contract, and the other party relies on this promise, the promisor is estopped from retracting it, as seen in the High Trees case. The second type is estoppel by representation. If a party makes a factual representation that the other party relies upon, they may be estopped from denying that fact. The third type is proprietary estoppel. This is often seen in land and property matters, where a party acts on reassurances or representations about certain property rights to their detriment. In Singapore, promissory estoppel generally prevents a party from going back on the promise, even if there's no formal consideration. You can watch my earlier videos on consideration and contract formation, provided that reliance and fairness are demonstrated. This concept is embodied in local cases, although the Singapore courts remain cautious, applying estoppel only in specific situations where it is fair and just. Now, let's look at some relatable examples to understand how estoppel functions in real-world scenarios. Imagine a landlord agrees to temporarily reduce rent for a tenant who is struggling due to an economic downturn. The tenant, based on this promise, adjusts their internal budget accordingly. Later, the landlord tries to charge backdated full rent. Here, promissory estoppel may prevent the landlord from reclaiming the past amounts given the tenant's reliance on the promise of the reduced rent. Second example, a supplier promises a client extended payment terms of 6 months without a formal agreement. The client then places a large order in reliance of the representation. If the supplier then suddenly demands immediate payment, the doctrine of estoppel could apply, preventing the supplier from enforcing the strict terms for immediate payment retroactively due to the client's reliance. Finally, A parent verbally promises a portion of their property to a child who then invests time and resources in improving the property, like renovating it, painting it, planting gardens or whatever. If the parent later denies the promise, proprietary estoppel could prevent them from retracting it, as a child relied on the assurance and acted to their detriment by doing the renovations, improvement works, painting and all that. These examples illustrate how estoppel helps uphold fairness when promises influence real decisions and actions. The doctrine of estoppel, particularly promissory estoppel, reflects the court's aim to enforce fairness and protect reliance. It prevents unjust outcomes where one party leads another party to rely on a promise and then attempts to retract it. In Singapore, the application of estoppel underlines our judicial system's commitment to integrity in contracts, especially in cases where strict application of legal rules might lead to unjust results. However, it's essential to remember that estoppel does not create entirely new rights, but instead limits or enforces obligations in specific circumstances. Courts apply estoppel cautiously, ensuring that it's only used where reliance is evident, and it will be inequitable to allow the promissor to resolve from their promise. This ensures a balance between contractual freedom and equitable fairness. Estoppel might seem like a complex legal doctrine, but at its core, it's about protecting parties who rely on promises in good faith. High Trees brought estoppel to the forefront of contract law, shaping how courts approach fairness and reliance. In Singapore, this doctrine continues to serve as a cornerstone, ensuring that parties cannot simply retract assurances when others have acted on them. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the doctrine of estoppel. I'll see you in the next video.